Those ancient Greeks, they left us with a lot of puzzles in the game world, a lot of vague and incomplete references. The Romans were much better at explaining themselves. But today I want to talk to you about a game that might not even be a game. Greetings, my friend, and welcome again to my game room. Hey, you know, about 3,500 years ago, there was a sprawling 5-acre palace built on a mountainside on the island of Crete for King Minos. And eventually a city grew up around it of 18,000 souls. And this city was the center of their ceremonial and political world, as well as a commercial port. And it was also the site of the famous mythological labyrinth of the Minotaur. It was built by Daedalus for King Minos. Now, the city that grew up around this palace was called Knossos, and it was the grandest of all the cities and all the palaces in the Minoan kingdom. And about 1450 BC, it was overrun by the Greeks. It was eventually just abandoned entirely. Nobody seems to know why. So now let's fast forward to March of 1903. And there's this English archaeologist, his name was Arthur Evans, and he came to the island of Crete, and he hired himself a staff of diggers, and they went up onto the flower-filled mountainside and started digging. And that's when they rediscovered this grand palace of King Minos. And amongst the artifacts they dug up was this. It was a rectangular item made on a wooden base with valuable materials such as ivory, rock crystal, glass paste, gold, and silver. 4 cone-shaped ivory pieces were found next to the artifact, and this led Evans to conclude that this may have been a board game. In Greek, this item is called the Zatricion, but in English it's become known simply as the Knossos board game. But there is no evidence whatsoever of how to play this game, or even if it was a game. This particular artifact could have been a number of things. It could have been a floor plan. It could have been a decorative panel, a work of art. It could have been somebody practicing their skill at artistic endeavors. We just don't know what it was. But the fact that there were some ivory conical pieces next to it, it certainly feels like a game. The first set of rules were published in 2007 by a Greek named Christos Kostas. And then Dmitry Skiryuk in Russia, who has written other speculative rules to ancient games, wrote his own set of rules for the Knossos board game in 2011. Niklas Hillbaum, who is a professor of archaeology at Lund University in Sweden, also tried his hand at a set of rules for the game. And even Ulrich Schadler, who's written rules for other medieval and historical games, tried his hand at it as well. So just a couple of years ago, 2021, a fellow named Victor Gonzalez wrote a set of rules for the game too. It kind of synthesizes earlier rules, and he came up with a game that is not unlike other games of the period. The assumption being that the cultures were pretty much on a parallel as far as technology and so on. And of course they traded with each other as well. And so I've chosen to share that with you today on this video. So let's get underway. In this set of rules, and most others, the Knossos game is strictly a race game, but with some hazards along the way. The players are attempting to get their pawns along the path and off the board. Each of the 2 players receives 5 pawns, which start off the board. There are 3 stick dice, or Egyptian tetrahedral dice if you have some. When the 3 sticks are dropped, the result is determined like this. 1 die flat side up equals 1. 2 up equals 2. 3 up equals 3. Equals 4, which is sometimes 1, but I'll explain that in a second. Players take turns tossing the sticks until someone gets a 1, and that player goes first. Each player will be following a specific path around the board's features. Here's one player's path. The other player follows the opposite path around the board, a mirror image of this path. No pawns may move backwards or leave the path. Pawns can pass other pawns on the path, counting the occupied spaces as they go. Some of the spaces, highlighted here, are simple landing spots. If a pawn lands on an enemy pawn in any of these spaces, the enemy pawn goes back to start, off the board. Only one pawn can occupy any of these spaces at any given time. Landing on any one of these 6 spaces, left and right of the starting space, allows the player to take an extra turn. The big area near the center of the board represents the sea. All pieces must end their movement when they reach this space, and it can be shared by any number of pawns of both colors. It's a safe zone for everybody. Be sure to keep track of which direction your pawn is moving when you reach the sea. You must continue in the same direction as when you reach this space. The 4 large spaces with medallions can hold 2 pieces at once of either or both players. They are safe spaces. A 3rd piece cannot land or pass through these spaces if they are already occupied by 2. Players must toss either a 1 or a 4 to move a pawn off the sea and continue their trek around the board. This move is just from the sea to the large space with a light blue star. The 4 has the same value as the 1 in this case. Once there, movement continues as normal. When a pawn lands on either of the large spaces with black stars, that pawn must stop there and retoss the dice. That die result and any subsequent die result while they are on these spaces means this. 1 equals move on 1 space. 2 equals go back in the sea. 3 equals stay put on the black star. And 4 equals move on 1 space. So again, the 4 is a 1. The 4 smaller spaces at that end of the board, as mentioned earlier, are all normal spaces and hold just 1 pawn at a time. On the return trip, the passage through the sea is the same as for the first time. To reach the 2 spaces on the other side takes the same roll result as getting onto the blue star earlier in the journey. However, these spaces can only hold 1 pawn at a time. Finally, the big first space is also the last space. Pawns must land here with a roll of 1 or 4. A 2 or 3 can't be used to get into this space, and if you can't use a die result, the turn is just over. Pass the dice and try again on your next turn. Up to 4 pawns can be here at one time, and it's a safe space. Once a pawn is in the big finish space, any die result will allow the player to bear off the pawn. And once all of the player's pawns have left the board in this way, that player wins the game and the game is over. Okay, so it's not such a simple race game after all. I think I would recommend that you make a little cheat sheet to keep track of which of these spaces does what, because it's easy to lose track on these rules. But anyway, it's all pretty much made up. Nobody really knows how a game is played on this thing. And you might try the other sets of rules that you can find online and just see which one you like to play the most. So in conclusion, whether you play a game from some ancient civilization like the Minoans or you play some modern game, be sure to play every day.